there needs to be the push for multi-generational wisdom, because I think it's, both can coexist, right? Where older generations have disregarded younger generations.
Welcome to Climate Curious.
We're coming to you live from TED Countdown,
which is TED's Climate Summit.
Now, we all know that TED is normally about sparking curiosity, ideas, even inspiration. But sometimes an issue requires more than that, and climate change is just that issue. So TED Countdown is all about impact, it's all about action.
Right, and we've had an amazing opportunity to speak with some of the world leaders in the climate movement. So this season of the podcast is going to be intense and it's going to be amazing.
There are going to be some moments of silence,
right,
some moments of awe, definitely some laughter, and some unexpected climate confessions.
Some things that you've definitely never heard before. It's a good season. It's a good season.
So let's get started. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
So we're back.
It's so nice to see
It's
you
so nice
again.
to see you. So we are super thrilled,
Yeah.
super thrilled to have our guest with us today. They were also at Countdown with us.
Yes.
But we were all too busy creating content to speak,
Yes.
as we were discussing. Let me tell you a little bit about Isaias Hernandez. They are an environmental educator, the creator of Queer Brown Vegan, and basically they use like cool graphics and illustrations, videos to introduce people to environmentalism. We're going to find out a lot about their work and who they are. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
We're so excited that you're in London and we get to do this with you, because you're not a Londoner, right?
You're not from
Where are
here.
you?
Yeah, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California.
Tell us a bit about your work. How would you describe what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So I would describe my work as very simple things: colorful, accessibility, and diversity. I think that for so long, a lot of environmental education is so rigid. And so I really wanted to make sure that people are engaged in these conversations. And so I use color a lot in my writing, whenever I take notes, whenever I go to lectures, whenever I go to meetings. And this helps me synthesize the information to be more engaged. I realize that, using a black or blue pen doesn't really help me anymore. Mm-hmm. So I use that a lot in my work to transpire it on social media for people to have that accessibility. So it's really about bringing this introductory guide for people so they don't need to feel ashamed where to start. And then from there, they're able to develop their own frameworks to build upon what they want to do in this movement.
It's really interesting because those are not words that I would associate with climate or with the climate change movement or the climate crisis or any of that stuff. The word colorful doesn't ever come into my mind. The only color I associate with it is green. And then beyond that, it's probably black and blue, right? Like documents and papers and books and whatever. So how did you get here? Because it seems like a weird placement of a person who almost in my mind doesn't fit. Do you know what I mean? So what was the journey to that point where you were like, this is something I care about. This is something I want to impact?
Yeah, I think that, growing up low income and living in affordable housing, I think a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color are normalized to internalize injustice, whether it's social, racial, environmental. And I think there's a lot of victim blaming within ourselves, saying my parents they didn't work hard enough in life. We are poor because we deserve this life. And so a lot of the times I had these questions of why is my home poisoned with toxic chemicals in affordable housing? Why is it that I have to live near a train that generates so much noise pollution that wakes me up? Why is it the fact that I'm not able to get public transportation for my school and I have to take the public metro? And, all of these questions end up really internalizing people to feel like they're less than. And so I think when I was younger, I just started to ask more questions and started to become more curious. And that ended up leading me to get in trouble a lot of the time in education spaces and silence a lot by teachers. And, one of the funniest things I remember is just always asking questions why do we come to rich communities and pick up their trash, but no one comes up to our communities, and just being told by the teacher, don't, that's disrespectful. It's no, it's disrespectful that they make us do this for them and teach us conservation, quote unquote. So I think that after I pursued environmental science in high school and then going to college, it's because I learned about the term environmental justice. And there was a EJ org in my own area that came and said, like, based off your economic status and your zip code, you probably live nearby toxic facilities.
Right.
And I was like, wait, what do you mean? They said something like, it's by design, by racist policies and racist individuals. And so that's when I started to kind of unpack this idea of like, maybe it's not our fault in our communities that we're living in this way. It's literally by like racism. And so me trying to make those interconnections from like economic, social, racial, environmental, and like how that interconnects as a high schooler was really difficult for me because like
I think it's difficult for people of any age. There's something you said that I think I never thought about it this way, but we don't always know the questions to ask, right? Like you don't know what to search.
Right.
You don't know what to ask. No one has given you the language or the framework. So you are really for a long time reaching around in the dark to figure out how these things link together and how they link to your life. Mm-hmm. That for me is just a bit of a mind blown.
Because that's a new conversation as well, right? Like, it's not a new conversation and that's part of the issue, but just it was an invisible conversation.
So I would say that my primarily environmental justice lens that I learned in academia was through grassroots organizers in the Bay Area or / Students for Environmental Collective at UC Berkeley, because environmental justice was taught by a white professor. And I really did not had such a difficult time just trying to understand what he was trying to say. And as someone who grew up in the community that faced environmental racism, it just made me angry. It's like, why do we have to use these fancy terms? It's like, my people know we're being poisoned. Like, we don't need to use these like sometimes heavy frameworks. When I took the class, I kind of saw it as a joke and a slap to the face because like all the teachers and the professors teaching the course, it was just very centered on the idea of like the Environmental Protection Agency as a institution in the United States being able to protect communities. And it's like, no, they didn't, because if they did, they would have protected so much more and can do so much more as an active organization. Whereas the credit for environmental justice organization was so limited. And the idea of like just centering, the father of environmental justice movement, Robert Bullard, who is a great person into this movement, but the erasure of women in environmental justice movement was a thing too happening in academia. Like no one talked about Hazel M. Johnson. Like no one talked about how she sued Chicago Public Housing Authority to win her lawsuit. Like no one talks about other women of color in these movements. And so I had to really dissect that and ask other questions with my own students, my own colleagues, like in those spaces, like who are these people? Like, why aren't we taught these people? And so a lot of frustrations, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, this is something like, I think this is so important because this speaks to this larger point that me and lots of people of color that I speak to did not feel like this movement was for us because it felt like there was no one in there, doing the work that looked like us, that had our experiences, that came from our backgrounds. But actually, they were there. They just got no attention, right?
Yes.
They got no profile. I think that's so important. I hope that's changing. I feel like part of what you're doing with creating content and putting it out there on forums that people can access is there's less gatekeeping. So I would love for you to tell us what like a day in the life of you looks like.
Yeah, no, this is such a great question. So I manage a team of 4 to 5 people now. And so it's really great to have like an assistant, a photo assistant, videographer, stylist when I need to do
epic.
stuff. So yeah, it's really great to have those connections. But I think my average day is actually looking at topics that I deeply care about and certain things, not to say like what's not being talked about on social media, but what can be more, delved into as a more strategic lens for people to kind of intertwine, whether they're fighting for economic, migrant, environmental justice. And so for me, researching is really the mornings of my days. I spend 3 to 4 hours actually reading research articles and finding them through...
Sorry, I just whispered wow into the background. I'm like, wow, reading articles. But that is important, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
No, of course. No. It takes a long time. I use Sci-Hub actually to be able to access scientific journals because they cost money. So I use a different server to get through there. But through there, I realized like a lot of the language written in those articles are so inaccessible. And so I dissect them and really rewrite them and try to simplify them and cite them. But the other thing is asking myself, once I have these notes to synthesize, like, how would you explain this to someone trying to understand the intersections of these issues, right? And I think now a lot of Generation Z and millennials understand solidified issues, right? We know that the immigration industrial complex is an issue, prison is an issue, military is a huge issue in this movement. And so how do we get people to draw these interconnections? And sometimes I have to personalize the experiences and really talk about my own experiences having to deal with these industries or loved ones through research articles or articles that were posted online to get people to understand like these are realities that we're facing in the environmental movement, and we cannot just stop at looking at eco-friendly products and sustainable lifestyles, but really extend ourselves to these deeper topics because they're uncomfortable. A lot of the times I didn't know about them and I feel ashamed for it, but that's not to say that it's not enough. And so I think designing and creating takes like 3 to 4 hours, like the posts I would make. Currently going through a brand redesign, so it's costing me a lot of money, but it should hopefully to be set in November. So
we'll watch out for that.
Yeah, it'll be a book version now than a little kind of Instagram infographic.
I have a question, which is that you said something very interesting there about not wanting to take up space. And I would think that you were like the least person to be taken, like there should be space for your voice and voices like yours in this movement. Do you think this idea of not taking up space is also a form of this kind of internalized racism about like judging our own voices and not seeing them as valid as part of these movements?
Yeah, I think it's like in two unfold. One unfold is the idea of like growing up and taught to be silent, taught to like not question things, taught to like respect elders, especially from like academic institutions, seen as more than less than myself. And so I think that definitely has affected a lot of the way of how I'm really treated in this space, whether, you know, I introduce myself as environmental scientist because I did environmental science in undergrad, I'm respected more, but then I use my username, Queer Brown Vegan, it's like they like see me as a joke. And it's hard because when you enter these professional spaces or digital creator spaces, it's like even then you're seen as less than compared to all of these environmental scientists that may have been older or existed doing these other works. And so it's like we're competing against this like other system, but then we have this other system behind us of our community being critical, which is good to have in dialogue, but it's also this idea of where I'm trying to find the balance of like decentering and centering myself at the same time. Meaning that, like, you know, not every time I want to speak is important to certain spaces. Maybe there's sometimes you just need to decenter yourself. And that's not a personal attack. That just means that, like, you're actively leveraging your privilege and power in different spaces and respecting the people that are in those spaces. So I think it's really, it's not like a black and white issue. It's more about like determining the idea of like how we fit in these spaces, and constantly month by month, the idea of like how I was back in 2018 to now. It's like it's a lot of unpacking for me to do.
Yeah, it's nuance, right? It's like this idea of and it's hard, I think, for people to think that it's all or nothing. I'm either speaking all the time or I'm not speaking at all. And actually the truth is that you need the middle ground. There are spaces where your voice is exceptionally important, and there are spaces where you can listen and not center yourself. I love that.
Right, so Mariam, I've been thinking, how did we start this podcast?
That's a great question. So at TEDx London, we're all about ideas worth spreading. We've explored everything from gender and borders to technology and design at our events. We've been doing this for 5 years. And in that journey, City has been our headline partner, and they've been with us every step of the way. But when it came to the climate crisis, we needed a new format. We wanted to break out of the red circle, to speak directly to the climate leaders, to ask questions and to be curious. And as always, City was there with us, supporting our vision, encouraging us to be courageous and adventurous with our ideas. So thank you, City, for making this podcast and all of our work possible. For the love of ideas, for the love of curiosity, for the love of progress. City. Now back to the show. Okay, so I want to move on to something I heard at TED Countdown that was part of the conversation that I would love to delve into in more depth. And it's the idea of youth washing. Okay, first, can you give us like a top line as to what you see youth washing being, and then let's get into it.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to define it right now. So I believe that youth washing is when corporations, institutions, and organizations team up with younger environmental advocates or younger individuals in the space that are advocating for social, racial, environmental change, and therefore use their own voice in order to platform themselves as a face for justice, as a face for movement, when in reality, those corporations, institutions, organizations still have links to private prisons, fossil fuel industries and banks. And so this kind of creates this ideal of fake reality that is unfolding. And I think what we're seeing now is that more and more youth are getting into this movement, choosing social media and digital platforms as a way to share their voice. But you see corporations now are trying to fund these people and to get them to their talks in order to showcase their quote unquote solidarity.
So it's kind of like greenwashing, but with young people. So it's like this trying to say that you're greener or more socially conscious, aware than you actually are as an organization. Like it's, very superficial. Is this something you've experienced?
It's really interesting. So I'm 25. So sometimes I'm seen as too old. Sometimes I'm seen as too young.
It's the most awkward age,
weird.
25.
It's so weird because it's
so
like
awkward.
I wish. I usually look back on that age. But I also felt like it was awkward when I was there.
It's a weird age, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, at this point, when corporations have reached out, I think I know myself more because when I was 18 through 21, my relationship with social media was more as like a personal account, meaning like I attended protests, I did activism, I did identify myself as an activist like when I was younger, and didn't really use my social media platform to kind of talk about these issues. I was like, I'm just gonna keep it separate, develop my relationships, and kind of got to know myself more in this space and gave myself tools and resources of how to handle issues. I think as I've gotten older, it's very confusing to be labeled in different spaces. Like sometimes like in articles like activist or like educator or scientist, and all of these different labels that are given to me. And so I think that, I've taken a lot of stance with my community that has standed with me, and just to say no to a lot of corporate sponsors that have reached out to, whether to promote their products or to attend their events. And I have had just to put my foot down and be like, no, I'm old enough to reject this opportunity. I'm old enough to reject a celebrity's request to say, I don't want you, / I don't care, because I care more about human beings that are more local to my community than you just and your marketing agency just trying to get me so you can just use me as a prop. Like, I'm tired of that, and shame on you for like not challenging yourself enough in this industry.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing. I think that for me, is what encapsulates the interesting part of the youth washing phenomenon. I found it so weird because the first time I heard it was from a young person. And when I think back to when I was 16, 17, up to 25, I probably would have jumped at the opportunity to be the face of a campaign or to be like tokenized in that way. I don't know if I would have realized that I was being tokenized.
Youth are rejecting and staying true to their power. And then there's also this idea that I've noticed in younger movements is identity crisis, meaning like when you've talked to certain climate activists, it's like they almost have a script of what they're saying. Right. And it generally scares me because every time I'm in an interview, I say different things because I don't remember what I said. Right. I was like, okay, well, let's see if I get this right or the wording's correctly. But if I mess up, I mess up. And so I think that because there's so much pressure on the youth, it's like they're almost molded to become this robotic person and, being platform from left to right, whether it's an organization, celebrity, institution. Right. It's like they become this person that, they really value and, they value the connections, the relationships, the people they've met, but they don't know who they are. And that is generally the most scary thing because that's what allows exploitation at a younger age. And we've seen this with any industry. And I think because I've witnessed a lot of my friends in different industries, whether it's like the modeling industry, for example, like just them being exploited at such younger ages and being destroyed years later. I think part of that, what that comes from me is the idea of like where I came from and my roots. Like I understand like I didn't come back my family like are really smart. They come from a lot of rich culture and wisdom and practices from Mexico. And unfortunately, due to the US policies and what labels someone a citizen and undocumented, they're seen as less than. And so I think like I remember where I come from, and like I remember like the struggle that like I did put in, and like the people who believed in me. And I think like I just want to make sure that like I still stay true to my younger self and not continuously being like, oh, I met this celebrity, like come like hang out with me, or like I met this person. And so it's just this fine line, I think, of when I was younger in college, just being able to discover myself and like be able to validate like my anger, my sadness, my grief, like my love for others, and being able to like translate that now into more healthy relationships in my life. And so I think now like saying no to people, it's like, yeah, closed doors will happen a lot in this industry. But that's not to say, what if I'm not even aiming for that? I'm just aiming for my survival in my community. Because at the end of the day, like when we're facing a crisis, like your followers aren't going to run to your help. The people that are going to run to you are your neighbors, like the people who, or your dog or your animals, like those are the people that you truly want to care about. Because at the end of the day, like what good will social media save me in my future?
There's this feel, I've been listening to you, and the thing I've realized, and very much been also reflecting on my younger self and when I was an activist, and if I would have jumped at the chance to do things, is I think when I was younger, I just felt so grateful to even be included.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's not the right attitude.
Right.
You can be humble and you can be gracious and all those things. You don't need to be an asshole about it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like, if you feel grateful to even be at the table, it means that you've believed that your voice isn't necessary there, right? Like that's what it is. And what I find so amazing about this is that this deep belief and knowledge that so many young activists like you have in this movement of knowing that your voice is essential.
Yeah.
And that you don't need to be grateful for being included, because without you, it doesn't happen. I think that's part of it. The other thing that has really, really struck me here, because, I think there was this period of time where it was like, oh, look at these young, cool youth activists in climate. It's so great. They're going to save us. They're going to do this. And actually, it was after talking to a friend of yours and a friend of ours, Clover Hogan, who's been on the podcast, that it really started to strike me that isn't it actually totally horrific that we have to depend on young people, essentially giving up being young to hold us all to account? Like, what the hell is wrong with us? Yes, you can both admire and commend people for what they're doing and the work they're doing, and also recognize that it's totally shameful that they have to.
Yeah.
This is my big realization about it.
Because it's not their responsibility.
It
shouldn't be their responsibility, right? And I guess collectively it's all of our responsibility, but there are those of us who have had that opportunity to learn ourselves and to understand what's important and to build community and to have support, like community networks and support networks. And I feel like it's almost prematurely thrust on young people that expectation of like, you do it for us.
As if it's at all like, and if it's at all a possible legitimate that people under 25 and under are supposed to be able to reverse and undo systems that like 200, 300, 400 years of people have not. I don't know. I just feel like there's this idea of including young people and doing it genuinely that's important. But then there's this idea of relying on you entirely, and that's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there needs to be the push for multi-generational wisdom, because I think it's, both can coexist, right? Where older generations have disregarded younger generations. But our parents, our generation, like as Black, Indigenous people of color, like a lot of them hold cultural, spiritual, and religious wisdom to allow us to build better relationships with ourselves. And I think this is the idea.
Yeah. I do think we need to be careful when we think about, oh, how great it is that young people are doing this. There's two sides of that coin.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about is this all sounds super fun and like super, like you research, you make social media posts, you go to conferences, but what you're fighting for is for survival. And what toll does that take on you as an activist and those around you? Like, how do you take care of yourself? What is the cost that you're paying here?
Yeah, I would say like within like mental effects, like constantly having to write and be challenged in a good way, critiques, but then also negatively attacked online because of your topics and the way that you're writing is really degrading. It's almost like you're in a classroom constantly getting graded and being like F, or like you didn't talk about this, or like why, or like constantly being angry of like not being excited enough, not being perfect enough. But in reality, I've told my community like I'm going to continue making issues, and we need to like be imperfect environmentalists to be better people in this world. But a lot of the times I think because we live in such a society now of like, you need to know all of these things. If you don't know, call out. If you don't know this, call out. But it's like literally like my parents were not always radicalized because they had to be indoctrinated by these systems. Like, I'm sorry it took me like 21 years of my life to kind of unlearn these ideas, and can also challenge my people around me of like how we can unlearn it together, because we have to quote unquote survive in this system that exists, but then also create of other options that exist outside of these systems.
There's a weird nexus moment of like activism and consumerism that have like joined together especially in the online forum, right? Like when your platform is Instagram or your platform is Twitter, there's this constant requirement of you to create and to produce. When do you have a break? Like, do you have downtime? What does your downtime look like? And like, not just interrogating you, but I think that this is really important for any of like our younger listeners who are aspiring to work in this field, who are aspiring to be activists, who are already activists, who are already organizing in their communities. Because I think one of the benefits of youth is that you have the energy to do that stuff. Mm-hmm. But one of the drawbacks is that you don't have the foresight to know that it runs out, right? Like you don't realize necessarily that the time might come when you burn out, or when you, and I'm like super interested in how you navigate that space, because I think that's an incredibly hard, and I'm saying this as a 31-year-old who still doesn't get it right, like who just disappears from the world for months at a time because it's tough.
It is. Yeah, no, I relate to that. And I think because I worked post-grad at a full-time job, I worked at a creative agency, it taught me what a toxic environment looks like. Right. Always being messaged after hours, messaged on the weekends. Something I made very clear with me and my team is that we only work Mondays through Fridays. Weekends are permanently off. You can work at any times of hours that you want to. So like I give my team part-time like flexibility to really make sure like, they're taking care of themselves. If they need a week, 2-3 weeks off, just let me know. I don't really care. Like, you need to take care of your health. And one thing I also do is like I do a lot of foraging now. Something that I really missed growing up is like hearing stories from my parents when they used to live in farms in Mexico, like what they would forage like herbs or flowers and how to make teas and mushrooms. And so I kind of got into that this past year. And foraging has really changed my life. Like I spent 3 to 4 or 5 hours in the forest, just like identifying, looking at mushrooms, and like it's so much color. Yeah, it's so awesome. Like there's literally orange mushrooms, yellow, blue, like purple. Like there's so much biodiversity and microdiversity, and it just allows me to really reconnect, not with nature, but more of my values and like how I can share this with my community years later. And so it's more like I need to go plan content and go foraging. It's more like, if I find something cool, I'll just record it. But like, if I don't, like, it doesn't matter because I'm just here by myself. And so I think giving myself time away on weekends, living nearby forest areas has helped me a lot. And it's kind of given me a more better work balance life, instead of like before, like you said, when I first started this as a freelancer, like I was working Mondays through Sundays, and it was bad to a point where like my partner had to be like, you keep working. It's like concerning. And I'm like, I'm afraid that I won't be able to sustain this career. And so unlearning that took a lot of times, because when you grow up low income, it's all about scarcity and like resources. Like you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it just added so much stress. And I think unlearning that helped me to be like, it's okay. It'll be fine.
I mean, I'm just so impressed in a way that you're unlearning it now. I mean, like
still at the weird age of 25. I feel so a real sense of like gratitude for you being here. And I'm sure that you know, right? Like I'm sure that you experience it all the time and people tell you all the time, but like I like you're so important. And the fact that you've charted a path for other people to be able to see. And that is like what was not a possibility before. Like you said at the beginning of all of these things that we can now tell people to Google, you couldn't Google 10 years ago. There was no phrase, there was no place where that was archived. Thank you so much for being here. I feel really encouraged. I hope for those of you who are listening, you also feel really encouraged because it's so hard and there's so much work to do and it demands so much from us. But for me, you're like an example of like, it can be done. Do you know what I mean? Like you can do it and survive and be like healthy and happy and go foraging in the forest and like look at some mushrooms on your days off and make sure you have days off. Like all of those things are like so important. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much again. This has been such like a therapeutic conversation. So
that is the word. I feel like I'm not going to bore you. I'm not going to bore you, listeners, with the 75 light bulbs that have gone off in my brain from this conversation. But I feel like it has been a very healing and therapeutic conversation. Yeah. So thank you so much. We have one more thing.
It's not over.
It's not over. You mentioned it, the idea of being an imperfect environmentalist. So I think, Ben, we're going to move on to...
And now, it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
For those of you who don't know, Climate Confessions is a segment of the show where we talk to the awesome people doing awesome things in the climate movement, but who also can tell us how they're not perfect, because perfection is not the goal here, right? We're all human, and we have a little bit of fun with this. So I don't know whether you have a climate confession.
Yes, I would say it's so funny. So I, strive for this idea of like looking into low waste, like reducing your active waste. Like, I'm not 100% plastic free. I literally wear retainers every night, which are plastic.
Right.
And so one of the funny thing is that I had a cotton tote mesh bag to put like fruits and vegetables in the supermarket when you go, and it literally broke. And I was like, you know what? Like, I hate these cheap, eco-friendly products. Like, they're not always like, they don't always work. So I just grabbed the plastic and I was like, well, I'm not going to be carrying like 10 oranges on my arm. Yeah. Like like, no, I'm not going to shame myself for like using a plastic bag. And so like I use it sometimes because sometimes the cotton tote mesh bags, like they fall out, or like you put things in it and they like, there's holes in them because I've been using them for so long and they just fall off easily. And it's like, no, I'm not going to let food go to waste.
Yeah,
just trying to be zero waste when it's like, I'm just going to use this plastic and continue advocating to people to divest away from petrochemical companies. But, it's like, this is the reality. It's like, there's no such thing as like 100% zero waste unless you're very like perfect in your world. But I want to meet someone who's perfect.
I haven't met those people yet.
Yeah, I've not met anyone like that.
Yeah. So no, I don't have one. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us again. And try an almond flat white if you get the opportunity. And remember, stay curious.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please rate, subscribe, and share this episode with a curious friend. It makes it possible to keep making this amazing content for you.
Oh, and slide into our DMs at TEDx London and let us know which climate extraordinaires you'd love to hear from next time. Oh, and don't leave yet. We wanted to tell you a bit more about who made this podcast possible.
Yeah, we did. TEDx London's headline partner, City, has been supporting us for the past 5 years to bring world-changing ideas to the TEDx London stage. And now they're taking it to the next level by making this podcast possible. Thanks, City.
But wait, that is not all.
No, this podcast was produced by the amazing Josie Coulter.
Curation and research by the genius Tara Cooper.
Artwork designed by the visionaries that are Sabrina Russo and Rebecca Mingus.
Mixed and engineered by the iconic Ben Beheshti, aka The Falcon, who also composed our banging theme tune.
Presented by me, Mariam Pasha.
And by me, Ben Hurst. Stay curious.